there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging markets saw a late flurry of activity today, and that's after China's export data rebounded last month. On the continent, South Africa's JSE little change today, with losses by banks and retailers offsetting gains by some of those miners. Now, we saw the banking index down 0.94%, while platinums were up 1.38% and gold miners were up 1.25%. Over in Nigeria, market heavyweight Dangote Cement and oil firm Mobil helped push the oil share index into positive territory today. Now, also coming up on the show, we look at the task ahead for the new regime in Sudan. E-commerce company Jumia to list on the New York Stock Exchange. And why Uganda is a different kind of banana republic. Well, let's start off in Sudan. The head of the country's Provisional Military Political Council says the army has no intention of holding on to power. While a military spokesperson said their only concern now is public order and that the future of Sudan will be decided by the protesters who took to the streets to demand President Omar al-Bashir's removal. Here's CGTN Susan Mungeli with more.
Sudan's military maintains its only concern is public order.
God willing, the government will be civilian. It will be a civilian government, which political groups will decide on, and we will not involve ourselves in the process. They'll sit together at a table and then hand us a list and say, this is our new government.
The military is reaching out to protesters who have expressed doubt about the army's intentions.
We did not come here with solutions. The solutions will come from the protesters. Give us the solutions and your political, economic and social prospects. Our loyalties do not lie with any one ideology or group.
It further says it will not extradite President Omar al-Bashir on war crime charges. The assurances by the military has, however, done little to appease the protesters who are demanding for a swift return to civilian rule.
We will not sit down for dialogue. Our dialogue is one phrase: the fall of the regime. And it will not fall once, but in different times. And if Bashir's party continues lying and cheating the protesters, the fall will continue.
The Sudan Professional Association has called on protesters to continue their demonstrations until their demands are met. Susan Mungeli, CGTN.
Now, of course, South Sudan has been following those developments in its northern neighbor Sudan keenly. The two economies are connected through oil, and here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with their perspective.
South Sudan's oil passes through Sudan before being sold on the international market. The money from this oil is shared by the two countries.
We only wish people of Sudan that they will have stability so that we also have stability. So South Sudan has the longest border with Sudan. So insecurity in Sudan is insecurity in South Sudan. Sudan is the key guarantor for peace in South Sudan. So we wish that the situation in Sudan will be stabilized so that peace prevails in Sudan for the benefit of the two citizens of South Sudan and Sudan.
But some analysts say South Sudan's independence in 2011 marked the beginning of the end of President Omar al-Bashir's reign, since it denied Khartoum much-needed oil revenues. In 2012, South Sudan shut down oil production after disputes with Sudan, which resulted in revenue cuts. After resuming production, a civil war broke out in South Sudan in 2013, destroying some of the country's oil fields. But President Omar al-Bashir was instrumental in brokering a peace deal for South Sudan last year, which in turn saw oil facilities begin to run once again.
Because of the peace, the country is able now to increase oil production and to bring back into production some of the oil fields that were closed. We were also lucky that during this period when the oil production started to increase, also the international oil prices improved.
But all of this seemingly came too late for President al-Bashir's time in office. Several attempts by the central bank in Khartoum to try and stabilize Sudan's economy failed, and the country's worsening economic crisis caused fuel, cash and bread shortages that set off a wave of unrest over the past 4 months. Patrick Koyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Now, at the same time, Thursday's ouster of Sudan's long-serving leader, Omar al-Bashir, has triggered uncertainty amongst Kenyan businesses. The East African nation's national carrier, Kenya Airways, which of course runs 5 weekly flights to the troubled country, was the first to take a hit. The flag carrier cancelled 2 of its flights between Nairobi and Khartoum amid those tensions. Now, for several years, KQ flights have fueled a thriving trade that opened up Sudan for Kenya's tea, coffee, its spices, as well as its tobacco. Well, let's move on now to Zimbabwe. The country has reached an agreement with the International Monetary Fund on a program of economic policies and structural reforms. Now, the deal is set to help the Southern African nation to fully recover its economy and re-engage with the international community. Here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with the details.
In the last quarter of 2018, Zimbabwe achieved a budget surplus. Having noted that progress in balancing its books, cutting expenditure, and realizing that a much sought-after bailout may not be forthcoming, the IMF has agreed to offer Zimbabwe technical assistance.
It will be very, very difficult for this country to attract financial assistance. That's why IMF is saying, I think in its wisdom, as a country, you have to emerge out of your problem. You have to sort out your own problems through adjusting internally, through doing what is proper, what is required internally.
Under the staff-monitored program, the IMF will track set benchmarks, including lowering of a double-digit fiscal deficit, eliminating exchange rate distortions, and implementing reforms for recovery. But that journey will be much harder, with the economy expected to contract by 5.2%, according to the IMF's projections, pushing Zimbabwe into recession for the first time since 2008. But Zimbabwe's treasury remains bullish, insisting the economy will expand 3.7%. They may differ on the actual numbers, but what is undisputed is that there will be slower economic growth this year on the back of a poor agricultural season, the devastation of Cyclone Idai, and government's austerity program.
You don't expect robust growth if you are implementing austerity measures, because what you're trying to do is you are saying excessive money supply has to be reduced. So the moment you reduce money supply, it's a contractionary policy.
Facing a currency shortage and spiraling inflation, government recently undertook currency reforms and has introduced new taxes to improve revenue. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Well, let's move on now to some of our corporate headlines today. Kenyan Airways says it will be profitable within 4 years if the government approves its proposal to replace the Kenyan Airports Authority as operator of the East African nation's aviation hub. Now, the airline's officials were in Kenya's parliament on Tuesday to discuss their proposal to create a unit to the country's main airport, JKIA, under a 3-decade concession. And the CEO of Kenyan-based oil marketing firm Kenol Kobil, David Ohana, has resigned from the company. The Pan-African company has been the subject of an insider trading probe and is also undergoing a takeover by French firm Rubis Energy. Now, the Paris-based Rubis agreed to buy Kenol Kobil in a deal that valued the retailer, with operations in 6 African markets, at around $353 million. Bonds issued by Saudi Aramco in this week's unprecedented offering sank for a second day, even though its debut in the international capital markets drew a record-breaking demand. Now, the order book for the oil giant's bond sale climbed as high as $100 billion, smashing previous highs for emerging market borrowers. The demand from fund managers also neared record highs seen in developed market debt deals. Its declines come as oil prices in New York fell from a 5-month high. And transportation network company Uber has filed documents for its much-anticipated public share offering. According to media reports, the pricing is expected to raise $10 billion. Uber's valuation in its latest private investment round was more than $70 billion, but reports said the ride-hailing firm was likely to seek a market value of close to $100 billion. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a quick break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. The exciting discussion around intra-Africa trade continues across the continent. And African countries position themselves for whatever comes out of Brexit.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Now, the African Development Bank has pledged its full support towards achieving the Continental Free Trade Area. This, of course, is part of its strategy to help promote Africa's integration. To accelerate trade facilitation, the bank has invested more than $20 million over the past 5 years to boost trade support, cross-border transport, and energy infrastructure.
If you talk of the African economy, I mean the African Continental Free Trade Area, we can trace it back to the ordinary summit of 2012, where African heads of state in Addis Ababa decided on the establishment of the Continental Free Trade Area by 2017. As we speak now, 49 countries have signed the agreement, and as of last week, we have 22 ratifications. What this means is we have reached the threshold of actually implementing the Continental Free Trade Area. 15 countries have already deposited their instruments. The remaining 7 are yet to deposit them. And one can estimate that by June 2019, you would have all the countries, the 22, having submitted or deposited their instruments of ratification.
Now, of course, a number of countries have ratified the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta and Mauritius Prime Minister Pravind Kumar Jagannath have declared their commitment to supporting the Continental Free Trade Agreement. The two leaders spoke at the Mauritius-Kenya Business Forum in Port Louis.
Both Mauritius and Kenya fully share the belief that the CFTA will eliminate high tariffs, generate employment, especially for the growing young workforce, and harmonize the operations of our Africa regional economic communities. More importantly, we are very attentive to the area of intra-Africa trade, which is expected to massively grow according to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. As compared to other sub-regions of Africa, the East African region has a better growth rate of around 5.9 to 6%.
The objective of the agreement is to create a single continental market with free movement of people, goods, and services. With its implementation, the African continent will realize employment creation, economic development, business integration, and increased market access. And I therefore encourage you to ensure tangible business compacts are established with the aim of transforming this great continent. And I am confident that we will continue to interact at all levels with the overall objective of improving our economic ties. This reflects the clear promise of our free trade arrangement on the African continent that offers the offer of advancing Africa's social economic development to help us attain our African Union Agenda's 2063.
Now, the government of Mauritius has lifted a ban on a number of Kenya's farm produce as the two countries signed agreements to enhance trade between them. Kenya will now export avocados, baby carrots, baby beans and broccoli to the Indian Ocean island country. Kenya's president and Mauritius Prime Minister said their countries were committed to continuing support between the two, especially in the private sector, by ensuring a conducive environment for enterprises to thrive. Now, there remains uncertainty over what the new October 31st deadline for Britain to leave the European Union might bring. Countries trading with both the EU and Britain are now considering various scenarios that may affect bilateral and multilateral agreements. CGTN's Angelo Coppola takes a look at the potential impact Brexit will have on South Africa's economy.
For the South African Customs Union, which includes South Africa and Mozambique, who are negotiating with the United Kingdom, it's now a wait-and-see approach. There's one scenario that concerns the South African Customs Union, though, and that's a withdrawal that leads to Britain being left outside the EU Customs Union immediately or in the medium term.
And in that event, the British have published a tariff schedule, and that tariff schedule says that for South Africa, all of the fruit-based exports, including wine and all of the fresh and processed fruit, would enter duty-free. There would be duties on motor products, and that is the big concern for South Africa. There would be duties on meat products, and that would be a big concern for our neighbours. And there would be duties on sugar, which would also be a concern for us and for our neighbours.
Davies says the fruit-based exports and any possible action in that sector has more to do with Southern European producers wanting to protect their market share and using citrus black spot regulations to keep the South Africans out.
We would anticipate that a country like Britain on its own would be maybe more accommodating and amenable on regulations like this and be in line with, for example, the United States, which doesn't have the same regulations on citrus black spot.
A major concern is the impact of Brexit on the South African and European auto sectors. It's to do with the rules of origin on components and the highly integrated auto plants in the EU, Britain, and to a lesser extent South Africa.
Under the rules of origin that we have in our bilateral arrangement for the duty-free access that we have into Europe, which is nearly a quarter of our trade with the European Union, we would have components from both Britain and the EU27 and South Africa recognized in the rules of origin. And so the question would arise if Britain were to leave and there was no agreement, what would happen to the recognition of inputs? That's the issue that's outstanding with us. It's called cumulation.
South African industry leaders are waiting on tenterhooks to see what happens with Brexit, and only then will they be able to make any firm decisions. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's head to Tanzania now, where Prime Minister Kassim Majaliwa has announced a nationwide ban on the use of plastic bags. Users and manufacturers in the country have until June to clear their stock. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more on that story.
Tanzania now joins Kenya and Rwanda in East Africa in banning single-use plastic bags. The government says they're unsustainable and harmful to the environment.
We are taking these steps to protect the health of the society, animals, environment, and the infrastructure from the big effects of plastic pollution.
Tanzania's government has previously told retailers to stop providing single-use, lightweight plastic bags. But now, it's moving to enforce a much stricter ban, saying the effects of plastic pollution can no longer be ignored. The environmental community in Tanzania has long campaigned for the government to ban single-use plastic bags in Tanzania. The big question now is, are people adequately prepared? Some entrepreneurs have already shifted to producing environmentally friendly, biodegradable bags.
What we need to adapt to are eco bags, baskets, paper bags that include envelopes, all other forms of bags that can be used more than once and last longer.
As the ban looms, it's not clear whether 2 months will be enough to phase out single-use plastic bags. But Tanzania's government believes it's a step that has to be taken. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Meanwhile, Tunisian authorities have announced an ambitious project that aims to train thousands of students on vocational and technical skills. Now, commentators note that the North African state has successful experience and expertise to create up to 1 million jobs in the next 5 years. CGTN's Adnan Ashaushi with the story.
The Tunisian African Business Council held an international symposium in Tunis on the theme of development of a legal framework governing the professional integration of African graduates in training centers and the offer of internships in Tunisian private companies for African university graduates.
Many African trainees and students prefer to stay in Tunisia at the end of their training or higher education, while others return home. They are the best ambassadors for Tunisia in their countries of origin because they are familiar with the business and professional environment here in Tunisia.
The head of mission of the International Organization for Migration, IOM, noted that Tunisia provides many employment opportunities in many economic sectors, such as industry and services.
Integration of migrants in the Tunisian society is possible. Tunisia is a country of migration. 1.3 million Tunisians work and live abroad. Therefore, there is a high demand for skilled professionals from Africa. The infrastructure is available. Now we need to put in place the legal framework.
The Migration and Foreign Workers Department and the Ministry of Employment and Vocational Training in Tunisia added that more and more Tunisians are working in sub-Saharan Africa.
On one hand, Tunisia is one of the favorite destinations for African students. On the other hand, sub-Saharan Africa is attracting Tunisian professionals. The market is constantly growing, especially for vocational trainees.
Tunisian authorities emphasized the importance of improving cooperation and exchanges between African universities and training centers in the next 2 years.
Tunisian authorities announced an ambitious project which aims to train thousands of students from sub-Saharan Africa on technical and vocational training. Experts assert that the North African state has a successful experience and expertise in this promising field, which can create up to 1 million jobs in Africa in the next 5 years. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And in Uganda, China's footprint is improving the livelihoods of thousands of people. So far, Chinese investors have developed several parks and are currently developing more with the aim of creating some 40,000 jobs in the country. Well, our reporter Daniel Arap Moi is in Uganda and brings us more on that story.
Just like many other African countries, Uganda is looking at the Chinese industrialization model to pull millions of its people out of poverty.
In the last 5 years or so, they've created about close to over 56,000 jobs. in their private parks and in the companies that we have licensed.
In the country's Mukono district east of the capital Kampala, hundreds of youths are reaping from the benefits of newly set up Chinese-owned industrial parks.
Like I now practically I can weld, I can do some mechanical work which I did not know.
Most of people are getting now a living from them, so I'm happy with what they have done for us in Uganda.
The Mukono-based Chinese industrial park, which deals in mattresses, plywood and steel manufacturing, employs over 1,500 local youths. Tiantiang Group is one such Chinese investment that is changing lives of hundreds of young men and women in Uganda.
I managed to buy a plot in my village. And my kids now, they are at school.
The industrial sector development is a key priority of the Ugandan government and occupies a central position in the government's social and economic development plan. Chinese manufacturers have now taken advantage of this key development agenda, which is expected to culminate into Made in Uganda by China industrialization approach.
On average, we license about 60 Chinese companies per year, on average, for the last 5 years. And cumulatively, since Chinese have been investing, which has been from about, vigorously from about 2008, Chinese investments are valued up to over $1 billion.
China has also contributed significantly to Uganda's infrastructural development, particularly in the areas of transport, energy and ICT.
Move around Uganda and look at the major infrastructure developments and look at and see the impact that we have had with China, not only in the infrastructure developments but also in the private businesses.
Officials say more jobs are expected to be created with time as Chinese factories increase production capacity for both local consumption and export.
We are seeing also a lot of investment in social projects like hospitals. When it comes to private sector, as Uganda Investment Authority, that's where our interest is. There's a lot of investment from China.
According to the Uganda Investment Authority, Uganda is among the top 4 investment destinations for China in sub-Saharan Africa. In 2017 alone, foreign direct investment from China to Uganda amounted to approximately $219 million. Uganda officials say there is a lot that Africa can learn from the Chinese experience.
Ugandans are learning Chinese. Quite a number of Chinese are learning English. So now we are beginning to see joint venture partnerships becoming a reality.
Special economic zones is China's industrialization model that Beijing hopes to spread to other countries. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now, but still coming up on the show. Africa's leading e-commerce company Jumia lists on the New York Stock Exchange. And Chinese Premier Li Keqiang discusses boosting business ties with leaders from Eastern and Central Europe.
Data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
past the hour, let's recap today's headlines. Now, in Sudan, protesters have continued with demonstrations despite assurances by the military that it did not have ambitions to hold on to power. While defying a curfew, thousands have continued a sit-in outside army headquarters in Khartoum. Protesters have also been reported in other towns as well. The protesters insist they will not accept anyone from the old regime to be part of the Transitional Council. And in Libya, a warplane belonging to Eastern forces have attacked a government military camp. According to a local source, the attack happened in the western town of Zuwara. It is not known if there were any casualties just yet. Now, the airstrike is the closest to an oil and gas facility since the Eastern forces launched an offensive on Tripoli. Meanwhile, gun battles continued on Friday as the two sides defended their positions on the outskirts of the city. In Kenya, authorities are pursuing militants who kidnapped 2 Cuban doctors early Friday. According to the police spokesman, the suspects headed towards the Kenya-Somali border with their victims. The incident happened in the northern county of Mandera early. Now, the attackers also killed a police officer who was acting as the doctor's security. No group has claimed responsibility just yet. However, authorities are pointing an accusing finger at the Somali-based Al-Shabaab group. The group has been staging frequent attacks within the borders of Kenya. And thousands of Algerians have continued protesting for the 8th consecutive Friday. They are demanding that the ruling elite step down ahead of elections set for July. Most of the Algerians have been expressing their dissatisfaction at the appointment of caretaker President Abdelkader Ben Salah. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, Africa's largest e-commerce firm, Jumia, has become the first African tech company to ever list on the New York Stock Exchange. The company's stocks traded at 34% higher at $19.22, valuing the company at about $1.5 billion. Now, founded in 2012, it leverages technology to help consumers access better goods and services and build sellers' businesses to drive growth impact. Jumia is currently active in 14 African countries with more than 81,000 active sellers transacting online with millions of consumers. The e-commerce platform directly employs more than 5,000 team members in Africa. Well, let's find out more about that listing from co-founder and co-chief executive Jeremy Hodara. Very welcome to the show, sir. Now, of course, Jumia has been called Africa's answer to Amazon as one of Africa's leading e-commerce platforms, currently active in about 14 African countries, as we mentioned. What was the rationale behind the listing on the New York Stock Exchange?
Thank you so much. I mean, look, we are the Pan-African leading e-commerce platform, and we are present in 14 countries. So what we wanted to find and what we were looking for was a set of investors who had a good understanding of marketplaces and emerging markets at the same time. And, you know, that's what we found here in New York.
Well, experts do say that there is quite a lot of appetite and certainly liquidity for these types of businesses over at the New York Stock Exchange. Give us a breakdown on how many shares are up for purchase, what the price range per share will be, and certainly how much you plan to raise from this listing.
I mean, look, our focus is to grow the business and to make it more profitable every day. Then, you know, we grow, we build a healthy business, and then the market decides what's the valuation of the company, what's the stock price, and our job is to build a good business. Then the market decides.
Right. Well, let's look at the performance of the company. It has seen improving revenues, reporting over $120 million in revenues back in 2017. It also posted losses of almost $200 million in 2018. Give us a sense of the story behind the numbers in terms of Jumia's performance.
Of course, I mean, look, when you have to build an e-commerce business in Africa, of course, you have to build a marketplace, which is what we have done when we have our 4 million active consumers who transacted with our 80,000 active sellers. But then you have also to invest to build two platforms that are very important to do e-commerce that didn't exist when we started 2 years ago. You also need to build a logistics platform, and we have thousands of logistic partners all across the continent that are helping us deliver our products. And we also had to invest to build a payment platform, where now we have more than half of our transactions in Nigeria and in Egypt, which are our two largest markets, that are happening online. And so those are the three pillars, the three foundations of Jumia that we had to build from scratch when we started 7 years ago.
Right. Well, on that note, consumer-focused online retail, it has captured the attention of investors, certainly looking to tap into Africa's growing markets. But looking at markets like Nigeria, as you mentioned, that's one of your biggest markets. We have seen players in the industry, such as Deal Day and Conga, struggling. Now, as a market leader in this segment, what's your take on the sector right now?
I mean, look, what we are building and the value proposition that we are offering to our consumers is really to address basic needs, which is to save time and save money. So e-commerce is very relevant for everyone, for the middle class, for whoever needs to buy a product. Now, to make it happen, it's very complicated. You need to build the technology, you need to build a team, you need to have the expertise and the skills. And so that's very complex. And also it's important in Africa that we are present in 14 countries because it gives us a macro diversification. And so all those components are required to succeed.
Right. Now, on the back of this listing, give us a sense of Jumia's plans on the continent going forward. Are you looking to expand into any new markets or further into existing markets?
The latter. I mean, we're going to spend the coming years to grow our existing footprint, to monetize our existing assets, and really now the years going forward is about acquiring more consumers in our 14 countries to help our existing sellers sell more products to our consumers, to help our logistic partner grow their footprint into the regions, to drive the adoption of Jumia Pay, our payment platform, within our consumer base. So those really are our focus in the years to come.
Right. Well, many thanks for joining us there. Of course, that was Jeremy Hodara. He is co-founder and co-CEO of Jumia, joining us at the New York Stock Exchange. Well, let's move on now. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has discussed boosting business with leaders from Eastern and Central Europe at the 16+1 summit in Croatia. Li said China is ready to open up its economy to make greater trade volumes with the countries in that region.
In the 8 years since the establishment of the 16+1 forum, our bilateral trade has grown extensively. I hope that through this forum, our trade volume can reach hundreds of billions of US dollars when we meet again next year. To achieve this goal, China will exert unrelenting efforts to further open up its market and increase imports of products that are competitive and popular with consumers in China.
Now, of course, the Premier Li Keqiang also visited a major European Union-funded bridge, which is being built by a Chinese state-owned company. Last year, the China Road and Bridge Corporation won an international bid to construct the 2.4-kilometer-long bridge over the Adriatic Sea. Here's CGTN's Aljosa Milenkovic with more.
In the heavy rain, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang arrived at the construction site of the Pelješac Bridge project, accompanied by his Croatian counterpart, Andrej Plenković. They've come to meet the people who work on this bridge, mainly from the China Road and Bridge Corporation, the CRBC, which won the construction bid 2 years ago. It is the first time a Chinese company has worked on a major infrastructure project in EU territory and under the EU rules.
This bridge is a pilot project, both for cooperation under the 16+1 program, as well as for cooperation between China and the European Union, because the Chinese company won a tender in an open competition of several candidates.
The EU and its role and influence here is very much talked about topic. After praising the CRBC, Croatian Prime Minister Andrej Plenković expressed confidence that they'll finish their work here by the end of 2021. He also mentioned the importance of the EU in this project.
The fact that out of $586 million allocated to the Pelješac Bridge project, $402 million is co-financed by the EU is especially important for us. After it's completed, it will represent a permanent monument to our first few years in the EU.
Some analysts are saying that Croatia needs to appease the EU, since this project raised some concerns in Brussels because of China's involvement. Meantime, one local Croatian businessman sees this issue as a double standard.
Chinese would like to invest in East Europe, and always is like European Parliament saying that this is not so good because it's not transparent or any kind of other disputes coming out. But on the other way, they are very, very good connected with China, taking the loans, making the business in China, and also Chinese making in the Western countries.
Regardless, the Pelješac Bridge construction project is underway. It was a major moment for both Croatia and China when the two heads of governments marked the beginning of a new phase in the construction of Pelješac Bridge. It was another proof of the words Premier Li Keqiang said on Wednesday in Zagreb, that relations between the two countries are entering diamond era. Aljoša Milenković, CGTN, Briesta, close to Dubrovnik.
Now, of course, cooperation between China and Central and Eastern Europe has seen the expansion of trade links. The Belt and Road Initiative now means new possibilities for further cooperation. Here's more on that story.
Central and Eastern Europe is the interface for China's Belt and Road Initiative to interact with Europe. In 2017, all 16 countries in Central and Eastern Europe joined the Belt and Road Initiative. The strategic project has expanded the potential for cooperation. In 2018, trade between China and all the bloc worth more than $80 billion. Chinese companies have invested more than $10 billion there. And the 16 countries have invested a combined $1.5 billion in China, covering manufacturing, auto parts, finance, environmental protection, aviation, and medicine. Over 13,000 trains have shuttled between China and Europe since new lines were put into operation. And by sea, departing from China's southern coastal cities and sailing through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, the maritime route has shortened shipping time from China to Europe by at least 7 days. Some Central and Eastern European countries have seen increasing numbers of Chinese tourists. Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Serbia are among their top 5 destinations.
And moving on now, with China's air pollution blamed for a wide range of environmental and health issues, the government is now taking action. Levels of PM 2.5 pollutants are down in most cities, and an online PM 2.5 detection system has been installed in many of these cities to find out what's contaminating the air. Well, CGTN's Li Zhuanhua reports from southern China.
Car exhaust, dust and factory emissions continue choking China. The nation has suffered from particulate matter 2.5 for years, a chronic pollutant. Studies show the number of premature deaths due to air pollution nears 9 million every year. Now a group of scientists in southern China's Guangdong province are monitoring the sources of air pollution, especially PM 2.5 in over 100 Chinese cities. Invented in 2012, the machine, upgraded over the years, is able to provide statistics about air pollution by the hour.
This is the only way to monitor the sources of PM 2.5 particles in the event of heavy air pollution. It plays an important role in setting guidelines to tackle air pollution and in addressing the public's concerns. It can also save the government a great amount of money in preventing air pollution.
Now the machine has been sold to several developed countries, including the US, and in the future, some heavily polluted developing countries will be encouraged to get them. To find out how the machine works, we came to the lab, where one is being tested and ready for sale.
This part is called an aerodynamic lens. It sucks particles from the air into this tube and lines up the haphazard particles. The particle's speed is related to their diameter. By measuring the speed of the passing particles, we can find out their diameters. We have 2 lasers down here, which are placed like this. By measuring the time a particle spends on passing the lasers, we know the speed of it.
The machine doesn't work by sitting in the office. We boarded a van equipped with a machine, which just collected some air pollution samples.
This is the online air pollution spectrum. In the pie chart, we can tell the pollution is mainly comprised of car emissions. Second is coal. Now it's around 15%, but in the winter in northern China, it would move up to be the main pollution source.
Many Asian countries, including South Korea, India and Thailand, are all suffering from air pollution. Now measures to detect the pollution source are ready, but solutions to curb air pollution may require a lot more effort. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Guangzhou.
Well, shifting focus now, here's a look at how commodities performed today. A weaker dollar suddenly helped gold prices steady today, headed of course for its first weekly gain in 3 weeks. That's on dovish central banks and tumultuous stock markets today. Meanwhile, oil prices up as involuntary supply cuts from Venezuela, Libya and Iran supported perceptions of a tightening market which was already underpinned by a production reduction deal from OPEC and of course its allies. Well, let's take a quick break now. Still to come. We take a look at why Uganda is a different kind of banana republic.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, with trade turmoil and growing restrictions on carbon emission making for a tumultuous future, some of the world's biggest automakers are pivoting to a new market now, and that's Africa. However, the challenge that remains ahead is the growing number of imported used cars that continue to dominate the continent's auto industry. Here's CGTN's Laura Walubengo explaining.
At the edge of this forest in the Kenyan capital, thousands of used cars glitter in the hot sun, waiting for buyers. Imported from Japan and the Middle East, these second-hand cars continue to dominate Kenya's auto industry. They have become an obstacle for big car makers who are hoping to crack the increasingly growing African market. Global car makers like Volkswagen, BMW, Toyota in 2015 formed the Association of African Automotive Manufacturers to lobby governments to limit the imports of used cars.
For now, maybe that 1 million will cater for the vehicle which you wanted. Maybe a 2000cc vehicle will get with that 1 million. With the implementation of that policy, it means that with that 1 million, you won't be able to get that 2000cc car. So you'll be forced to go to a lower capacity vehicle, which means that you won't get the vehicle which you want. So basically, I think on my side, I think that the implementation of that policy won't be good for the consumer.
Africa's current population and household income is growing rapidly. However, its 1 billion inhabitants only account for 1% of the world's new passenger car sales.
It is very easy for us to produce cars in one of our global plants, import them into the various markets in Africa. But if we really want to create a sustainable industry, I think it's important we start looking and making the first steps towards some form of industrialization.
We started scanning the markets, and we looked into ways of opening them up, because they're literally not functioning right now due to importation of used vehicles all the way from Japan or the US. It's a dumping ground for used cars.
Used cars are among the leading imports in many African countries, and a pivot to this drift could help insulate automakers from the immediate effects of the electric vehicle revolution. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Meanwhile, a South African model has become the first woman with albinism to grace the cover of Vogue magazine. Thando Hopper is an advocate for people living with albinism. She is featured in this month's Vogue Portugal's Africa the Motherland edition. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with her story.
Thando Hopper has made South Africa proud. Her own unique beauty was chosen for this month's Vogue Portugal magazine.
I have been on national covers. In fact, the first Condé Nast cover I was on was Glamour magazine. But with respect to Vogue, Portugal, I mean, it's going to be shown in Milan, London, and it speaks to expansion. It means that your voice is louder, you know, so for me that means quite a lot.
Hopper, a former prosecutor and strong activist for albinism, has defied beauty norms since she took up modeling in 2012.
The whole point of representation is you're trying to rebrand and recreate the story that your body is living in, you know. You're trying to make sure that your body survives the story of oppression and discrimination. And I'm hoping that with respect to this kind of representation, the more human and more relatable the representation, the less the stigma will be.
It's not very often that we see people with albinism on the cover of fashion magazines. Right behind me, as you can see, there's nothing that's considered different or unique. But Thando Hopper has been changing that narrative. She's used her condition to show the beauty of her skin and to raise awareness around albinism.
Usually, minority groups are a casualty when it comes to that. So women with vitiligo, women with albinism, or people with albinism, period, the smaller groups, minority groups tend to disappear. So what I really am hoping that this will do is it not only gives a platform for people with albinism, but minority groups in particular, so that people begin to understand that that representation is with like a really significant value, and that basically we need a more human-centric approach in media.
She's a great example of breaking stereotype, and breaking stereotype is that inclusivity is part of it, and she is one phenomenal woman who has been chosen to represent African women, black women, people with albinism. She's opening not just to the Western world, but to a whole new European world, which is Portuguese people.
Thando was chosen as one of BBC's most influential women in the world in 2018. She hopes to continue using her voice to highlight issues affecting minority communities. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's move on to Uganda now. The country is sometimes fondly referred to as the Banana Republic of Africa, but it's not exactly what you think. The country is home to approximately 40 million people who simply like their bananas more than any other nation in the world. But why is the cuisine so important to people of this East African nation? Well, CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy finds out why.
Matoke is a type of plantain like starchy green bananas and is eaten at almost every meal by many people all over Uganda. It's mainly grown in the western and central regions of the country. Authorities say more than 75% of farmers in Uganda grow bananas, the country's staple food. Depending on the region, Ugandans eat as much as 1 kilogram of bananas a day. The staple food matoke ranks highest amongst the most important food crops in Uganda, with annual production estimated at 8.4 million tons, accounting for 15% of total world banana output. In Uganda, 65% of urban population depend on matoke.
Matoke demand remains high in Uganda, but supply is low, and this is further complicated by the fact that land is dwindling in Uganda due to the increasing population.
Average yields of bananas are 1,000 to 1,200 bunches per annum under medium husbandry practices and 1,250 bunches under excellent husbandry practices. Most of the production is for local consumption, with the country having the highest consumption rate in the world. In addition to providing food, matoke generates income to the farmers throughout the year. But farmers say just like any other business, there are challenges.
People lack financing and extension services. Some people have the knowledge on how to cater for the matoke because some people have bigger fields, but then they don't look after them very well.
Christine Ntabade is a proprietor of Luwombo African Food Restaurant located in the outskirts of the capital, Kampala. She takes us through the tedious process of preparing matoke in Buganda culture, which she says follows a laid-down sequence from the time it's hacked from the mother plant to the time it's served on a plate.
Matoke is our traditional food as the Buganda. It is what we grew up eating and grew up knowing as our food.
It starts with peeling the matoke fingers, which are later washed and placed into the cooking pan. Strips and chunks cut from the banana tree stem are used as a foundation at the bottom of the cooking pan so as to avoid the boiling water touching the bundle of the matoke being steamed. The fingers are then tied up into a bundle of banana leaves wrapped into banana fibers, forming a reef knot at the top, which is then put in a cooking pan with just enough water to steam the leaves. Now the cooking process has begun, and according to the chef, it will take approximately 1 hour before the matoke is ready for mashing. When fully cooked and tender, the bundle is removed and squeezed to get a smooth, soft and golden yellow mash, served hot with all the banana leaves around to keep it hot. People here simply enjoy their matoke.
Matoke makes me energetic, and since it's a very delicious meal, so I feel so nice when I'm taking matoke.
For a weekend, it's a must for me to eat matoke, yeah, and then some other 2 days in a week. So for purposes of balanced diet, that is when the rest of the foods feature in. Otherwise, if it was optional, I would have matoke from Monday to Sunday because it's so delicious.
When serving dishes, especially matoke in Buganda culture, a wife kneels and uses 2 steamed tender banana leaves, one in her right and another in her left hand. The right hand portions out a piece of mash and the left scoops it out for distribution. And Tabade says matoke is best served with ground peanut sauce.
Everyone has a special sauce to enjoy with matoke. There are some who say they like it with chicken, while others say they enjoy it with groundnut sauce, with fish or meat.
All in all, a meal for a Muganda is nothing without matoke. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Central Uganda.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand firmer against the dollar, with global sentiment boosted following the release of better than expected Eurozone industrial production data. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling holding steady against the greenback today, as of course inflows from offshore investors buying government debt certainly helped meet a dollar demand from the energy sector. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, have a great weekend.